the life of our church and congregation today. The Lord Mary has one.
Hi, I just wanted to tell everybody here and the people who are watching this at home to say welcome to Matt Carricker. We are thrilled that he is here to cover for Adam in this last segment of Adam's sabbatical. So Matt will be here every Sunday through June 25th. June 25th is his last Sunday. There's one Sunday in there just before that we will have an out-of-pulpit minister, but we will tell people who that is. We had someone, but it went away, so we were just looking for a replacement for June 18th. But anyway, we welcome Matt, and thrilled to have him back. It's kind of like alumni month to have Matt back here in church with us. So we're thrilled to have you, and let's go.
Thank you. Well, what a blessing. It's hard to believe it was about 10 years plus that I was here, so it's a blessing to be back with you all. And today we're going to be talking about how do we respond, and thinking and reflecting about how do we respond when life hits us with unexpected circumstances such as we've had over the last 3+ years. So I invite you to think about this question as we hear some music and reflect and pray. Where do you find God, the sacred meaning, purpose when life gets tough, when life gets difficult? Where do you find those sacred things? Friends, please join us for our first hymn, number 115, in your great hymnal, God of Grace and God of Glory. sing as we say together the covenants of this church together. In the love of truth and the Spirit of Jesus, unite the worship of God and the service of all.
Genesis chapter 33, verses 22 through others. All right, so we're starting here. In the course of the night, Jacob arose, took the entire caravan, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok River. After Jacob had crossed with all his possessions, he returned to the camp, and he was completely alone. And there, someone wrestled with Jacob until the first light of dawn. Seeing that Jacob could not be overpowered, the other struck Jacob at the socket of the hip, and the hip was dislocated as they wrestled. Then Jacob's contender said, "Let me go, for day is breaking." Jacob answered, "I will not let you go until you bless me." "What is your name?" the other asked. "Jacob," he answered. The other said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, or heel grabber, but Israel, overcomer of gods, because you have wrestled with both God and mortals, and you have prevailed." Then Jacob asked, "Now tell me your name, I beg you." And the other said, "Why do you ask me my name?" and blessed Jacob there. Jacob named the place Peniel, face of God, because I have seen God face to face, yet my life was spared. At sunrise, Jacob left Peniel limping along from the injured hip. That is why to this day the Israelites do not eat the sciatic muscle that is on an animal's hip socket, because Jacob's hip socket was struck at the sciatic muscle.
let us join together in a spirit of prayer and meditation. I invite you to close your eyes, take a deep breath, and feel your body in your chair, in your seat. Allow yourself to release past, let go of future, and fully be present in the here and now. This one present moment that we have to be together, to pray together, to reflect together. And so when past or future comes, just be aware of it and gently let it go. So as we enter into a spirit of silence and prayer, help us to remember that part of prayer is talking to God, talking to Spirit, and the other half is listening. And sometimes we can talk a lot, and sometimes our invitation is to just be quiet, or as the psalmist says, to be still and know that I am God. So friends, as we reflect together today on the challenging experiences of our lives, may we listen for that still small voice beneath our ego thoughts, beneath the churning of past and future that often runs our day-to-day lives. May we attune to your presence as we hold all those in need of our prayers this morning. And so let us take a moment in silence and stillness just to silently offer our prayers and blessings to any loved ones, any persons or communities in need that we could hold in the light of God's love this morning and this season. Blessed be. And now, friends, let us join together in the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray as we say together, Father and Mother, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Now, friends, I invite us to bless and offer our thanks for all the gifts that we offer, gifts of time, gifts of talent, gifts of treasure. Friends, this morning's offering will be collected, a free gift for a free church. neighbors, and together build one church community.
Quotes from Beyond Resistance, the Institutional Church Meets the Postmodern World by John Dorhauer, the current General Minister and President of the United Church of Christ. There is an emerging sense of fear and anxiety experienced by men and women who have given their lives in service to the church. They work endless hours for modest incomes. Until very recently, they have been reasonably hopeful that if they invested years in training, after acquiring a unique set of skills that would serve them and the church well, they would always be able to provide for their families. Second quote. We live in a context of a culture that doesn't deal well with grief. We are conditioned to anesthetize the pain and grief, and to invest in a panacea of market products that promise life, but which in reality only mask our underlying pain. As bearers of the light, however, we are reminded that we don't grieve as others who have no hope. Third quote. It is going to take a century or more, I am told, for this to shake out and for us to know whether or not something new is emerging. In the meantime, the church is compelled to get very clear about what it believes. The church is compelled to distinguish between how much of what they currently believe is a byproduct of culture, gender, orientation, etc. How much of what they currently believe can be sacrificed on the altar of change. Final quote. I believe it is time for the shamans among us to find their voice. I believe it is time for spiritual guides and directors to emerge with their poetry, their dance, their art, their music, their tongue, to entice us to those places where the Spirit is living, breathing, and calling us to new embraces of wonder, imagination, creativity, and I dare say it, hope.
And if you'd please turn in your gray hymnal to the responsive reading 654, Impassioned Clay. I'll read the regular type and you will read that which is in italics. Deep in ourselves resides the religious impulse.
Out of the passions of our clay it rises.
We have religion when we stop deluding ourselves that we are self-sufficient, self-sustaining, or self-derived.
We have religion when we hold some hope beyond the present, some self-respect beyond our failures.
We have religion when our hearts are capable of leaping up at beauty, when our nerves are edged by some dream in the heart.
We have religion when we have divine gratitude for all that we have received.
We have religion when we look upon people with all their failings and still find in them good. When we look beyond people to the grandeur in nature and to the purpose of our own heart.
We have religion when we have done all we can, and then in confidence entrust ourselves to the life that is larger than ourselves.
Friends, I invite us to the next hymn, number 211, in the great hymn hall.
Please rise.
Friends, please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be faithful to your word, to your call, and most especially to your love. Amen. So friends, again, it is such a joy to be with you today and again for the next 5 or so weeks. And please, I'd love to reach out and meet for coffee or tea or just a chat. You know, in our 10 years ago when I was with you, we weren't like setting up Zoom meetings, but now we are. So whatever avenue works to connect with you, I would love to. So this scripture that we heard today of Jacob wrestling the angel, he basically wrestles the angel until he gets a blessing out of it. I like to think of the spiritual path as simple, but not easy. Often spiritual truth as very simple, but not easy. So, for example, St. Francis, he would often preach sermons on love so often that his disciples once came up to him and they said, "Sir, could you preach on something else?" And he said, "Well, when you learn that lesson, then I'll teach another." Right? Which points to what the journey of the spiritual path is. It's about embodiment, right? That we have these truths, these beliefs, whatever you might call them, and that as long as they just stay in our mind or in our heads, they just kind of remain pious platitudes. And so the invitation on the spiritual journey is to move from just an idea, oh, that sounds interesting, to how do I live this? How do I embody it? How do I incarnate these truths into my own life or into this community's life? So this teaching today is a good example of that. Because have you ever had to wrestle God for a blessing in your life? I can tell you one example from my own life. So about 20 plus years now, when I was first a Jesuit volunteer in Belize. This was right after college. And I was there for 2 years, but that first month or two was extremely challenging. I mean, any first-year teacher will tell you, teaching for the first year is difficult. I was also teaching at an all-girls school for girls with discipline problems, so it made it extra challenging. And I was also teaching religious studies, which I had very little knowledge about. So lots of kind of the perfect storm of circumstances. And there was one day in that first month of teaching that because I was teaching religious studies and physical education and coaching, when one of the students in one of my classes, who was actually a pretty well-behaved student, she came up to me and very quiet, generally, but she just kind of handed me a note. So okay, I wasn't going to read it then, and then after class I took the note, opened it, and it said, "Sir," because they always address you as sir, "Sir, why do you have that scowl on your face?" Right? And for me, it was just like this blow to everything, to all my ideals, all the principles, all the truths that I held dear, because I had just committed 2 years of my life to going to Belize, Central America, and to serving and teaching and coaching and all these things, and here I was, you know, having a scowl on my face and not being the presence of love that I had hoped to be. So that evening, when I got, because I was living in a community of other Jesuit volunteers, 3 other people in my first year, 5 in my second year, we just happened to have spirituality night together. And when we got around the table, I just broke down. You know, it's just the grief of, oh, I don't know if I can do this. Like, this is really hard. And I was very tempted to say, you know, no, I'm going to go home, back to Massachusetts. Things are much more comfortable there. But I'll tell you more about later in our reflection of how I stuck it out. But what the principle is that life, that finding God, or seeking the sacred, whatever names are used for that, is easy when life is easy. When everything is warm and fuzzy and everything's great and it's a beautiful day outside. And it's a lot harder to seek God, to seek purpose, to seek meaning when life gets turned upside down and everything goes topsy-turvy and we're like, what on earth is going on? Right? When I teach mindfulness, because I do a lot of mindfulness, one of the things that I've been up to since I saw you last was I was a chaplain at Brandeis University for 9.5 years and doing a lot of things around mindfulness and meditation. And often one of the principles I would tell students, faculty, whatnot there is that mindfulness is very simple, but not easy. And so practice first in situations where it's easier. So like, for example, go on a nice day like today, go for a nice nature walk. And it's easier in that nice nature walk without a lot of distractions to be mindful and look at the birds, the trees and the birds singing. As opposed to if you just try to practice mindfulness first when you're driving and someone cuts you off in traffic, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. And so the principle is, if we don't practice finding God when things are easy, we're probably not going to find God or see God in circumstances where things are hard. Now, the last 3 years have been 3+ years have been pretty challenging for everyone, right? Once COVID started, and so many things have happened in multiple pandemics. So the Southern New England Conference of the United Church of Christ last fall released what they called a Resiliency Time Capsule film project, in which they were interviewing people, and mostly people from different churches in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, about how they were responding to what they called the dual pandemics of COVID and the health pandemic, but also racism, and how they were kind of moving forward and trying to integrate a new way. And they had 4 different categories, so I'm happy to send you those links if that's of interest. And Agape, one of the churches that I served, was interviewed as part of that. But what it pointed to is that for many churches, the COVID was like not quite a death blow. For some churches it was, but COVID accelerated the rate of decline that many churches were already experiencing. Right? And so when we think of wrestling a blessing from situations, it's not just situations in our own individual life, but situations in our communities. How do we wrestle a blessing from those situations where, let's just face it, this sucks, right? And so how can we ask this question of where is God, even in the midst of challenging times? And how have you all, as Elliott Church, found God in the last 3 years, all the challenges, health, racism, all the things that we've gone through? How have you tried to seek God, seek love, seek service, seek purpose and meaning in the midst of all that? Because it can be very easy when things get really challenging and tough just to say, forget it, God's not here, God has abandoned us, and just give up, right? Give up on church. And, that's okay sometimes. So, some churches have done just that. Between October and December of last year, I was serving as a legacy church pastor, because I was kind of in between calls. And what a legacy church pastor means, it's a church that's decided to close. And so I was with them for about 2 months, basically doing this, leading worship, providing pastoral care, as they had decided their last service would be the end of 2022. And so I was kind of inviting them to think about these questions of, where is God with you in the midst of all these challenges that you've been with? But also, where is new life? Where is new life emerging? Because something is changing and something is shifting. So most religious scholars say that we are going through this major shift, not only in our culture and life, but in church. Right? Matthew Fox calls it a new reformation. Phyllis Tickle calls it the Great Emergence. But what a lot of them say is that about every 500 years or so, the church feels compelled, because they move so far away from the core message of Jesus, that they feel compelled to have what Anglican Bishop Mark Dyer calls a giant rummage sale. And the church, this is a quote, the church, the empowered structures of institutionalized Christianity, whatever they may be at the time, become an intolerable carapace, like a hard shell that must be shattered in order that renewal and new growth may occur. And so according to Phyllis Tickle, Matthew Fox, and many others, we are going through one of those 500-year shifts right now. Now, Dorhauer, in the reading that Bob did for us from his book, Beyond Resistance, he has another name for it. He calls the church that emerged out of the Reformation 500 years ago, he calls it Church 2.0. And he calls the church that's emerging out of our current Reformation, Church 3.0. And because we're right in the midst of it, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. But let me read one last quote that Dorhauer says, that Bob did not read. Because all these things could easily be a cause for despair. But Dorhauer says, the church is experiencing real and profound loss. Church closing, staff cuts, untenable futures in once healthy and vital congregations, the absence in many settings of children and youth. This is in 2015. Clergy wondering where the next call, if not the next paycheck, is going to come. There is so much to grieve. We are called upon to own it. We are called upon to name it. We are called upon to endure it. We are called upon to experience, but not as others do who have no hope. There is hope. And he goes on to say, I admit freely to the grief I experience along the way. I do not grieve, however, as others who have no hope. I see with new eyes what the Spirit is doing in this time, and the call I feel to write about it, all of this, is not a call to talk about what is falling apart, but what is coming. In the end, this is not a word of despair, but of deep and profound hope, because of what I believe is emerging on the horizon. Now, just to give you a sense, this book was written right before Dorhauer was elected as the general minister and president of the UCC, which he has held for about 8 years now, and this summer they'll be electing a new general minister and president. So this is, in 2015, this is, the church was saying, this is what he's written, what he's saying is important for the life of our church, because so many of our churches are going through this profound grief and loss, and we're really getting in touch with impermanence, that life has changed and things have changed in church. But the question we can ask ourselves, that Dorhauer invites us to consider, is what is God doing on the horizon? What does God still have in store for us? Because we're still in Easter season, and I like to think that death and resurrection isn't just something that happened for Jesus a couple thousand years ago, but that it's part of life. It's part of our lives. It's part of our church life. And there are very few churches that existed 2,000 years ago that are alive today. Right? That life is change, and life is loss, and life is impermanence. That's what our Buddhist friends say, that life has this quality of everything that we can see is changing and shifting, and so we don't grab onto what we can see, but we grab onto what we cannot see. And so that's our invitation, is how can we ask these questions of what is God, or substitute whatever name you want, what is God doing in this time? How is God still with us? What new things are emerging in the church and in our lives that may look nothing like what we expect or anticipate? Now, and that doesn't mean that, we may consider ourselves, gosh, I failed. Right? And that's one of the things I tried to convey to the second church in Winchester that closed at the end of 2022 was, you didn't fail. Right? Your expression of church is closing, but church isn't closing. And so and this is a question that I continue to work through with them, is how is new life emerging in your setting and in your lives and in your hearts, to continue to ask that question? Because God is within each one of us. I don't have the answer to that question. You all have the answers to that question for Elliott Church as you pray, as you reflect, as you discern together. And I'm grateful to be able to journey with you over the next 5 or so weeks about that. Because you see, when tough times hit, it can just so easily take us to that depression and despair, and we can easily stay there and go down that little spiral. Like Dorhauer said, it's important not to suppress our feelings, not to suppress our grief. That's sometimes called a spiritual bypass. I'll just go to God and forget my grief and forget I have suffering, forget I have sadness. So we want to allow ourselves to feel our feelings, feel our grief, but also at the same time to hold that question where is there hope even now, even in this setting? Now, when I was having that really tough first year teaching, that was just that first month that I told you about in Belize. The first year didn't get a whole lot better, right? I struggled a lot with discipline, with teaching. I was trying to teach myself before I taught the students. And that summer was a turning point for me. I had one of my Jesuit mentors who just passed away a couple months ago. He's close to 100 years old. But he gave me a suggestion. He said, Matt, you should go on a silent retreat just for yourself. And so I did. In the summer of 2002, I went on a retreat before my second year of teaching in Belize. I said, I'm going to, not only pray and meditate and discern and journal and reflect, but I'm going to think about what is God calling me to? How can I change my teaching? Because obviously what I did that first year of teaching was not working. So how can I shift things? And long story short, I can tell you more details if you want afterwards. But when I came back that fall, I was like a new person. I made some serious shifts in who I was and my teaching styles. So when I came back, not only was I emotionally and kind of mentally and spiritually different, but I was like physically, I looked different. So my students were like, Sir, Mr. Carricker, is that you? Right? And so things can shift for us when we shift how we are in relationship to those losses and to those things. So my pastor friend, Molly Finney Basquette, she used to serve a church in Somerville, and probably about 5 or 6 years ago, she moved out to California to serve a church there. And several years ago, they had this major church fire that claimed most of the church campus. Now, late last year, she came out with a book called How to Begin When Your World is Ending. So this is a quote from her book, as she talks about how they tried to struggle with how to move forward from this church fire that claimed most of the church campus. She says, it drove us into deep disagreement and anxiety about our future. But recently, we all sent mail-in ballots to every member asking them to approve the tearing up of part of our parking lot in order to build 50 units of affordable housing, one small but mighty effort to address the Bay Area housing crisis. If the church had not burned down, we would never have taken this idea seriously. And we probably would not have brought it to a vote if coronavirus and sheltering in place had not revealed what really matters. And she concludes, in the hardest way, we have learned that church is not a building, but a people. People who are called to be someone's for others. So friends, that is the invitation for us in the midst of all the change, all the grief, all the loss, is to ask that question, not just for ourselves, but what is God doing now? What does God have in store for us? What new is emerging? It takes our own prayer, our own meditation, our own discernment, our own self-reflection to ask and answer those questions, because nobody can answer them for us. But we don't ask them for ourselves alone. We ask them but so that we can be a blessing for others, so that we can be someone's for others. Amen. Friends, I invite us into our last hymn, number 32, in our great hymn. As you go forth, remember that God is still with you. Amidst all the ups and downs, that spirit of love and life that lives in your own heart, in all of our hearts, continues to be with us and guide us. May we tune into that spirit today and every day. Amen.